It's a story that I've been following on social media and in Prospect magazine, which is a brilliant magazine if you don't already know about it. And it starts in a very odd place. It starts with me saying something that I never thought I would say out loud. It starts with me saying that there was something very interesting in Nadine Dorries' book. Yeah, I thought that would get your attention. And even more remarkably, something that, well, as far as people who have looked into this can tell, something that turned out to be true. Alan Rusbridger, currently the editor of Prospect, former editor, of course, of The Guardian and chair of the Reuters Institute, is the sort of self-appointed scoop hound who's gone after this. What was the story that you stumbled across? Thank you also for reading Nadine Dorries' book on behalf of the rest of us so that we don't have to. But what was the story that you stumbled across, and where has it taken you, Alan?
So on page 81 of Dorries' book, she was Secretary of State for Culture at the time. So she was the person who ultimately made the recommendation about who should chair Ofcom, which is the media regulator, which regulates the BBC. And she reveals that she was called into Number 10 to meet a man called Robbie Gibb, who is a BBC non-executive director, former spin doctor for Theresa May, and another aide, Munira Mirza. And according to Dorries, they both spent a period of time trying to persuade her to appoint one of the two candidates who were still in the race, a man called Lord Stephen Gilbert. But both of the candidates were Tory peers. The other was Michael Grade. And she describes Gilbert as a long-standing party apparatchik. So the Tory party wanted to get a long-standing Tory party apparatchik. And Robbie Gibb, who was a BBC director, i.e. the regulated party, was trying to influence the appointment of the chair of the regulator. So that's clearly improper. You can't have people choosing who's going to regulate you. And that was the basis of the sort of truffle hunt that I went on.
And what have you unearthed, or not?
Well, I've now checked. I've tried to check the story out with Gibb himself, and with Mirza, and with the Cabinet Office, and with Number 10, and with the BBC, and not one of them has denied the story. But they just refuse to say anything about it. So I sent 15 questions to the BBC and got a bland brush off. I then contacted the acting chair of the Board of Governors, thinking that she would at least want to stick by the principles of openness that govern the BBC board. She sent me a very dismissive note saying that she had talked to Robbie Gibb and she didn't believe there was anything in this. But she didn't say the story was untrue. So I think we can take it that the story is true, that a BBC director tried to interfere to get the right person, a Tory party apparatchik, in Nadine Dorries' words, to chair the regulator. And then that just destroys the independence of Ofcom.
I mean, a BBC director who, as you've said, has been on Theresa May's payroll as a director of communication. So although Michael Grade is a Tory peer as well, he's also a media figure of decades standing, and would at least.
Well, that was Dorries' point. Dorries' point was that Grade was, obviously more qualified. I mean, the story then gets darker.
Well, this is the bit that I did think sounded a bit fanciful. So I don't know if you've dug any further. This is the bit about the box.
Yeah. So she then says that having said that she wouldn't change her mind, she then gets a call from a man called Dougie Smith, who is a shadowy figure inside Number 10 of the Conservative Party, which she described as intimidating and bullying. And she nevertheless puts a note into the Prime Minister's box saying, no, it's got to be Michael Grade. She then gets a call, she says, and as I say, everything about the rest of this story has not been denied, saying that she should know that the advice note was tampered with in the course of the night. To say that that Gilbert should get the job. She rang Johnson and said, "Look, this thing has happened." And Johnson then says, "Okay, well, I'll go with your choice. It's going to be great.
I'll make sure it's great." I mean, it is, as you tell it, extraordinary, but it's hard to pinpoint precisely what the most extraordinary bit is. Whether it is the apparent lobbying, the apparent finagling, the interference with the ministerial box, or the complete failure of the BBC to respond satisfactorily to your repeated and very polite requests?
Well, all those are worrying. I mean, the attempt to get the right person in inverted commas into the Ofcom is worrying.
They regulate us as well, of course, Alan. It wouldn't just
right.
be the BBC. It would be
Right,
me
yeah.
as well.
I mean, it destroys. I mean, I'm afraid Johnson, by trying originally, you remember, tried to get Paul Dacre to chair Ofcom.
Yes.
And Charles Moore to chair the BBC. So this was the government trying to break down all the barriers between independence of the media and the regulator. So all that's worrying. But I'm also sad that the BBC, which I admire and support, doesn't feel in any way willing to verify the story. I mean, the story is clearly true, or the bits of it involving Robbie Gibb are clearly true. And my sadness is this, that in 2023, we rely on journalists to verify facts. So that means you ring up and say, look, Nadine Dorries has said this story. Is it true? And BBC journalists do that, I imagine, hundreds of times a day, if not thousands of times a day. And yet the BBC as an organization, asked a simple question, is this true or not, has repeatedly refused to comment. And I think that's just really bad behavior by the BBC. And if the BBC starts doing that, then why should any organization ever help any journalist ever verify facts? It's just really bad.
Do you care to speculate at all on why they would do this? I mean, Gibb is quite well known for throwing his right weight around at the BBC, lecturing journalists on what impartiality is and should involve, despite, as you've reminded us, having come box fresh from Theresa May's operation at Downing Street, something that Lewis Goodall, my colleague here now at LBC, has spoken of in the past, saying that he found it a little rich that he was getting lectures on impartiality from a bloke who got a peerage off a Tory Prime Minister. So are people scared of Gibb? Would you care to speculate?
Well, I think he's a very influential figure now, because we have a Conservative government. The Conservative government is putting a lot of pressure on the BBC, claiming that they're biased. And so a scandal involving the one sort of identifiable, self-identifying Tory on the governing body would be embarrassing. So I think that the media strategy is we just won't say anything about this. And I know there are journalists who have tried to pursue this story and have hit the black brick wall that I've done, which is why you haven't read anything about it. And I just think some of us should keep going. I've been using Twitter to approach various BBC programs to see if they will have me on, because the BBC would then have to, you would think, put somebody on the show to answer the allegations. And, imagine if Nick Robinson or someone asked a BBC spokesman, is this true? They couldn't flannel.
They're normally quite good at marking their own homework, even, I mean, in some famous cases, to their own detriment, aren't they? So it is a departure from normality.
It is, and I think sometimes the BBC goes too far in flagellating themselves. So there's something curious about this story, which doesn't add up, and I can't quite understand why. But it's something to do with the personality of Gibb, and maybe the timing of a new BBC chair about to come in, who is reported to be an ally of Gibb.
Well, we shall keep an eye on your work and happily invite you back to bring us up to date with any developments, Alan Rusbridger.
Thank you.
Thank you.